Jesus taught and preached the gospel of the kingdom of heaven. It's what he started with, and it is what he ended with at the end of his ministry. And he also invited his followers to join him and live this new and radical way of life. But have you ever wondered, what does it really mean to live as the citizen of the kingdom of heaven? So while many people today claim to uphold the doctrine of the two kingdoms, truly very few actually live it out. When it comes to the nitty-gritty, you find that many think that they can mix these two kingdoms, the kingdom of the world and the kingdom of heaven. Except for a few issues like drugs, abortion, and various illegal activities, many end up acting the very way that the worldly people actually act. But the early Christians didn't. Their radical commitment to this call of Jesus Christ to live as citizens of the kingdom of heaven challenged those that were around them to a point that they became enemies of the state. What can we learn from these people? How can their convictions challenge us today? Are we living as citizens of the kingdom of heaven, or have we lost our way? Let's explore this in this video. So what is the doctrine of the two kingdoms? Some people think that the kingdom of heaven is something we are looking forward to in the future that hasn't happened yet. Whereas that is one aspect. Someone has said that the kingdom is now and not yet. When Jesus was teaching, he said that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom of heaven is here. The early Christians didn't look at this as just a mere metaphor. It was a kingdom with a present reality that had a call to live today as citizens of God's kingdom. Jesus Christ prays like that, and he tells us to pray in the same way. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So through his people, we get to live out this heavenly kingdom. So to them, it was a present reality with its own way of life, with its own values and laws. And it impacted their day-to-day, even when they had to give up everything for the sake of this kingdom. So just as the New Testament teaches that presently there are two antagonistic kingdoms, and these two kingdoms cannot mix. One is the kingdom of God, and the other one is the kingdom that is under the rule of the powers of darkness, Satan being in control of these kingdoms. One being a kingdom of light, another one is a kingdom of darkness. One is about life, and another one is about death. The New Testament elaborates on this. For example, in James chapter 4, verses 4, he says, "Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God." So in one of the earliest sermons that have been recorded by some of the early Christians, it's written around the year 150 AD. This is a few years after the last apostle had died. This is what he says, quote, "This world and the next are two enemies. We cannot be friends of both." So they believed that the kingdom of this present world is under Satan and the powers of darkness. And this is a concept that is echoed all throughout the New Testament. And we see this exemplified in many of their quotes that I'm going to be reading for you today. The very first one comes from Origen. Origen is one of the earliest theologians of the church, and in his work against Celsus, he's giving a defense for Christianity. Celsus is one of the earliest critics. So he writes saying, "Celsus also urges us to, quote, take office in the government of the country if that is necessary for the maintenance of the laws and support of religions." So the opponent is telling the Christians, hey, take part in our governance. These laws are helping you to support our economy and our religions. However, Origen continues, "We recognize that in each state or in each country, there is the existence of another national organization that was founded by the Word of God," talking about Jesus, the Word become flesh and dwell among us. "And we exalt those who are mighty in word and of blameless character, who live to rule over the churches. It is known for the purpose of escaping worldly duties that Christians deny public offices Rather, that they may reserve themselves for a more divine and necessary service in the church of God for the service of men. So from this, Origen goes on to explain that no, this is not an abdication of responsibility in your worldly governance. But being a Christian, they've been called to a much bigger and a much more divine responsibility for the service of men and for the service of the church. So in his writing, he indicates that there's this separation between what the church does and what the state indeed was doing. Another one from Tertullian. Tertullian, writing around the year 195 AD to the Romans, he tells them, quote, "In us all zeal and the pursuit of glory and honor is dead. So we have no pressing inducement to take part in your public meetings, nor is there anything more entirely foreign to us than the affairs of the state." Keep in mind, this is really, really early. And these writings give us a glimpse and a picture. How did they understand what it means to live as a citizen in the kingdom of heaven? Another one, also from Tertullian. This one is to his fellow Christians. He tells them, as long as you deem yourself a Christian, you are a different man from a pagan. Give him back his own view of things. After all, he does not himself learn from your own views. Why be clothed by one who is naked if you have put on Christ? He's calling them to think about this distinction. Why copy after the pagans? Why copy after the non-believers if they themselves have failed to copy your own view of things? Why you, who has been clothed by Christ, just as the New Testament tells us, be clothed by the one who is actually naked? It is interesting. So you might have a question. Was this their invention? Were they coming up with these teachings? But just by reading the New Testament, you get to have a clear indication. This is what Jesus taught. This is how he lived himself. He's the Lord that told them that my kingdom is not of this world. In John chapter 18, when he's before Pilate, Pilate is telling him, you know why? Why not acting as a king, as the kings that we see in today's world? But he tells him that my kingdom is different. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have fought so that I'm not handed to you. But my kingdom is not of this world. And he had told them that no one can serve two masters indeed. You're either going to be loyal to the one or you despise the other. No one can serve both God and money. So whereas the context of this passage is Jesus indicating Christians how to view the wealth and how not to accumulate on earth but accumulate in heaven, this is a principle that we can expand and also apply in various areas of our lives. The Apostle John, in his first epistle, he puts it very clear. 1 John chapter 2, he says, starting from verse 15, "Do not love the world or the things of the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever." Emphasis on do not love the world or the things of the world. There is this call to live as foreigners, as aliens in this present kingdom. And this is what the early Christians took to mean literally in their way of life. Another interesting example that comes from the Gospel according to John, I believe in chapter 6, when Jesus, after making this miracle and feeding the thousands, they come after him and they want to make him a king over them. But what does he do? He doesn't gladly fall into their expectations, but he flees away from them. He knew that he had come to establish something that was much more different, that was much more grandeur than what these people were actually thinking. At the beginning of his ministry, he's tempted by the devil in the wilderness. And one of the offers was to give him the kingdoms of this world. He doesn't disagree with that. He knew that these kingdoms, these nations, these peoples that we see, they're under the rule or the prince of this world, the ruler of the darkness, Satan himself. But he knew that the kind of kingdom that he had come to establish was a much more different kingdom. So we've seen this preached and taught by Jesus Christ. There's a lot more scriptures that we can expand upon. But how did this impact the day-to-day lives of the early Christians? How did it make a change in how they lived? Let's read a few more quotes from some of them. So I'll read another quote that comes from Tertullian. It's important to know that Tertullian is writing from North Africa in Carthage, very, very close to home here. He says, "We acknowledge one all-embracing commonwealth, the world. We renounce all your spectacles. Among us, nothing is ever said, seen, or heard that has anything in common with the madness of the circus, the immodesty of the theater, the atrocities of the arena, or the useless exercise of the wrestling ground. Why do you take offense at us because we differ from you in regard to your pleasures?" So from Tertullian, he goes on to tell them that, hey, we don't participate in your forms of entertainment, the madness of the circus and how violent all of these things were. He talks about the immodesty that was seen in the theaters. And equivalent to this is what we see in Hollywood, in the movies that we are consuming, in the entertainment industry that we are seeing. How would the early Christians look at these things that are around us? He tells them that, hey, we don't participate in that. Nothing seen or nothing is heard in our circles that comes from your places. And interestingly, when you see the rebuttal or the refutation by the opposition, they didn't disagree with this. They just went on to give their own apology about how the Christians had to participate with them. They didn't say, hey, you guys are lying. We see you in our circus, in our theaters. But no, they wanted to convert them into their ways of life. But Tertullian says, no, we don't do that. It is evident. You see us, how we live. Like I read earlier on, Origen writing saying it is known for escaping duties that Christians avoid public office. Rather, they reserve themselves for divine service as the Church of God. And actually, because of this distinction that the early Christians were making, another key distinction was in their refusal to worship and serve these other Roman gods. As it was customs, you're entering the marketplace, you had to pay homage or to bow down and worship the gods and the Caesars, but they refused to do this. Furthermore, they refused to participate in the Roman known entertainment. And it didn't sit well with those that were surrounding them. They looked at them as filth. They looked at them as a race that was worth just abolishing and finishing away entirely. Like, for example, another one from Celsus and Origen. Celsus goes on to say, while he's having this debate with Origen, he says, in quotes, "They must make one choice," talking about the Christians, "between two alternatives. If they refuse to render due service to the gods and respect those who are set over this service, let them depart at once with all speed and leave no posterity behind them, so that such a race may become extinct from all the world." They looked at them as a cancer that was spreading. You can hear it in the words of Celsus, that such a race needs to stop existing. Hence the unending persecutions, hence the difficulties they had to go through for the sake of this way of life they had taken on themselves. So just as a foreigner who lives in a foreign land, who is restricted with what he can do, with how much involvement he can do in politics, in voting, and other things, they also looked at themselves as aliens, as foreigners in this world. As an old song goes, "This world is not my home, I'm just passing through." To them, it was as serious as it could get. A few more quotes that give us this picture. This one comes from Cyprian. Cyprian says, "We should ever in the day reflect that we have renounced the world and are in the meantime living here as guests and strangers." Clement Alexandria, also writing from Egypt, says, "We have no country on earth, therefore we can disdain earthly possessions." Cyprian, again, writing from the year 250 AD, "He who has put off the former man should think only of heavenly things. He should give no heed to the world he has already renounced." You can see this picture. The last quote comes from Hamas, writing very early, actually, also around the year 150 AD. He says, "You know that you are the servants of God. You dwell in a strange land, for your city is far away from this one. If you know your city in which we are to dwell, why do you here provide land and make expensive preparations and accumulate dwellings and useless buildings? He who makes such preparations for this city cannot return again to his own. Do you not understand that all these things belong to another and are under the power of another? Take note, therefore, as one living in a foreign land, make no further preparations for yourself than what is merely sufficient, and be ready to leave this city when the master of this city will come to cast you out for disobeying his law." Interesting, isn't it? I've had a chance of interacting with various international brothers who get to live within Uganda and getting to see how difficult it can be. They are limited in the amount of things they can do. Certain laws don't favor them that much. They, of course, obviously can't vote. They can't join the armies. They can't participate in politics. And it is clear that the early Christians were taking on the same mindsets. It didn't mean that they weren't affected by the laws of the land. Yes, of course, the taxation laws, the persecution, all these things. But where it went down to, do I choose Christ over these laws, they always went with what Jesus taught over this. And they had serious costs. Many were persecuted. Hundreds and hundreds of Christians were killed. They had to flee to various cities. But it wasn't a shock to them. It wasn't something that came as a surprise, because Jesus had told them, because of this way of life, get ready. People are going to hate you for my name's sake. If they've hated me, hey, what about you? He had told them that blessed are you when people persecute you for righteousness' sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. That is why earlier on we've seen that Cyprian was urging them that, brothers, let us think of the heavenly things alone, for we have renounced these earthly things indeed. You might be having a question. What went wrong? How did things change? And there is a place that we can actually point a finger to where all of these things started changing. And it is none other than the year 325 AD, where the so-called Council of Nicaea sat, when, of course, summoned by Constantine, who had converted, in quotes, to Christianity and was now actually favoring Christians. After this so-called conversion of Constantine, many things changed, and actually some good things happened. Like Christians and persecution had, of course, ceased earlier on around the year 313 with the Edict of Milan, which brought to the end of the Diocletian persecution, which was by far the worst persecution that had happened to Christians. And when Constantine comes and is giving all of these privileges to Christianity, he's making it a legal religion, and anyone can practice this freedom of religion. That was a win to the Christians. They ended these gladiator wars that happened for entertaining the Romans. But with these blessings, various things also changed. Things that were held to by these early Christians started changing within 70 years after the Council of Nicaea. You could look at the church, the representation of the church, and you wonder, how did we get to this place? A case study would be how Christians looked at Jesus' teachings on biblical non-resistance. For example, we have a few quotes that preceded the Council of Nicaea. Let's read a few of them again. One comes from Athenagoras. He says, "We have learned not to return blow for blow, nor go to law with those who plunder and rob us. Not only that, but those who strike us on one side of the face, we have learned to turn the other also." Another one from Tertullian again, he writes saying, "For what difference is there between provoker and provoked? The only difference is that the former was the first to do evil, but the latter did evil afterwards. Each one stands condemned in the eyes of the Lord for harming a man. For God both prohibits and condemns every form of wickedness. In evil doing, there is not account taken of the order. The commandment is absolute. Evil is not to be repaid with evil. Lastly, by Lactantius, he's writing towards the end of this period. He writes saying, if we derive our origin from one man who God created, we are clearly of one blood. When we suffer such ungodly things, he's talking about the persecutions and how the non-believers were treating them. We do not resist even in word. Rather, we leave vengeance to God. We see a depiction in the early Christian writings that when Jesus told them to love their enemies, to bless them and not to curse, not to use violence, just as he had disarmed Peter in the Garden of Gethsemane, telling him, away with the sword. Whoever lives by it will perish by the same sword. The early Christians lived this out. Being a Christian by then, you had literally signed your death certificate. But they knew that if Christ died for us, he has called us to lay down our lives for his sake as well. Unfortunately, like I said, within 70 years, the church that was originally the persecuted, they're now persecuting heretics. You have a different doctrine, you're going to be persecuted, you're going to be killed at worst, and in very brutal ways. So they had lost this stance that earlier they had been holding. There's another depiction. We're now even towards this period around the year 390 AD. We see from one church council saying that if any bishop uses the rulers of this world to gain power, let him be deprived. So we're saying that, post the Council of Nicaea, there are some people that were still committed to this, and there are some bishops that were using the worldly governments. Like I said, Constantine was now favoring the church to a point that he was paying church leaders that they may be settled. They are saying if any bishop uses worldly powers to come to his office, let him be deprived. The quote continues actually to say that all those that are in communion with him, they're going to be deprived as well. So what is the challenge for us today? So the challenge for us today is that just as the early Christians looked at the kingdom of heaven not as a metaphor, but as a reality, we too, in this 21st century, we have to know the kingdom of heaven is here. The kingdom of heaven is among us. And Christ has called a radical way of life that is supposed to turn our world upside down, literally. And have to keep listening to his words. He told us that if we seek to save our lives, we're going to lose them in the end. But if we lose our lives for his sake, we're going to find them. I'm not saying we should look for persecution, but we should go back to the basics. What did Jesus teach? What can we learn from his way of life? Also, how about these that were the first to receive the faith? Remember, this quote from Jude, contending for this faith that was once and for all delivered to the saints. How can we go back to this and live as citizens of the present kingdom of heaven? What can you do from today to start actually living as a member of the kingdom of heaven? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, if you enjoy this content, please ensure to subscribe, to leave a like for us so that many more people can be able to see this content. Grace and peace to you all. See you in the next video.